Alrighty, y'all. So today I want to do a very quick review of the new 52 Supergirl Volume 3. It's called Sanctuary. This, of course, was the DC compiled issues of the Supergirl series, and it's just kind of the next volume. I usually try to read my comics in volume formats just because I always generally like reading a collection of issues in a series because it's, like I said, an easier, more digestible way to read stuff. But I know always sometimes comic publishers don't do that. But I'm getting off topic. My overall thoughts on Volume 3. Going into this, I was pretty interested. The last volume kind of ended on a cliffhanger, and this was going to be basically following up on that. Now, the best way to describe this volume is it's very inconsistent in terms of quality. And it's mainly not really because of the stories themselves, I'll get into that. It's mainly because of how DC compiled the issues together in this series for this volume. Because there are certain sections of this volume that you're going to kind of read, and then they just kind of end. And you find out later that, it was in a separate series, other comic book run, that story was concluded, and then it, like I said, then moves on to the next thing. Really confusing, and I'm not really too sure why DC didn't include that stuff. Now, to kind of give you a brief little description, we find out that the billionaire guy, like in the last volume, he's alive, he's infused with the brain or some alien creature, and basically tries to get control of Sanctuary, which we find out is Supergirl's Fortress of Solitude, basically. We get to learn a little bit more about her backstory. We get to see, of course, at some point, she meets another character called Hell. I'm just going to call him Hell. It's kind of weird how it's pronounced. And he basically becomes the major crossover event between Supergirl and, of course, the Superman title and the Superboy title. We get introduced to Superboy, who he was introduced in the New 52 Superboy, or not Superboy. Well, I think he has his own series, but he was introduced in the Teen Titans New 52 stuff. And the big thing with Superboy in the New 52 is he's a clone of Superman, and he was from a period of time in Krypton's history where, clones rose up against the established order, and they were beaten back, and then the criminal organization basically creates a clone of Superman, a.k.a. Superboy. And he's really weird and interesting, pretty weird version of the character, to say the least. But kind of briefly summarize this. Superman meets this dude called Hell. He promises to go back in time and basically stop all of this from happening, save Krypton by going into the past. Supergirl completely goes into it. She buys into it, which I think in this series makes a little bit more sense just because she's already lost so much and she's been kind of bewildered by everything in this new environment that she's in. So it felt a little bit more believable. Now, the romance between them two was a little strange, but I guess, like I said, it was the heat of the moment kind of thing. And this dude, Hell, I don't know, he's just super powerful, man. Like, he basically throws people out of, the place that he goes into the Superman's fortress, the Fortress of Solitude, which in the New 52 is the Fortress of Solitude, but it's also Brainiac's ship. I know it's kind of strange, but Hell basically uses Superman's fortress and basically, with the help of Supergirl, is able to create this machine. It drains the sun of its energy to basically allow them to go back in time and prevent Krypton from dying. The Justice League get involved, Superman gets involved, Superboy gets involved, and it's like I said, it's a big storyline that crosses over from multiple titles. But the end of it, Supergirl realizes that by destroying the sun, it's going to kill potentially millions of people. She does the right thing, and one of the hardest things, I think one of the coolest and most interesting aspects of the comic, even I don't think it's nearly explored enough, she kind of stabs Hell with a kryptonite dagger and throws him away to some period of time, which we find out later was in the past in Krypton. And it's a really tragic moment. She gets kryptonite poisoning. It's a big event. And after that, the comic kind of continues. We find out about Lex Luthor in prison. And then we eventually meet Power Girl. So the other version, I believe Power Girl was like another Kara from another dimension, if I remember correctly. But it's been a while since I've read up on my Power Girl stuff. But she meets her, and then basically the rest of the comic kind of goes into the two Karas go into Sanctuary. The AI in Sanctuary is confused and is like, which one is the real Kara? Who at this point, the one that we've been following throughout this series, is kind of poisoned by kryptonite. She's very weak. She's kind of struggling to recover from all that hell stuff. And basically, after that, she has to fight for her own life in the fortress. And eventually, the fortress kind of blows up. They escape. And then, of course, there's a cliffhanger at the end. But yeah, positives. I did like the storyline, a little bit of hell, even though I do think there was a lot of aspects of it that were kind of confusing. I think, for one, this guy just seems like he has unlimited power, and it's not really explained why. Like, he just kept throwing dudes out of the fortress every time. Like, it's just really confusing and really weird. And I think, like I said, Supergirl buying into it made sense. I just think that the redemption of it all could have been handled better. And obviously, the big glaring issue with it all is the fact that it's not included with the volume in the trades that DC collected for this volume. The event is in the Superman volume. I think it was volume 3. And you have to read that separately. And if you just read it, like I said, if you read this by itself, you're going to be totally confused because it just jumps to the next story arc. It is really confusing. And that was a huge mismanagement on DC's part. And it doesn't help, like I said, I think with these trades, they need to include all of the issues and the crossover events in these volumes so that readers, don't have to crisscross volumes and can get the full context of the story. Which, like I said, just mismanagement on DC's part. But it was an okay storyline. It just kind of was, I don't know, it was kind of a little bit bland. It was a little bit bland. It got really repetitive, but I did like the sacrifice for Supergirl at the end. It felt very noble. And then all the Power Girl stuff was interesting. I am kind of curious where that's going to go, even if that goes anywhere in the next volume. We'll see. And they also kind of set up maybe some potentially more stuff with Silver Banshee. Forgot to mention that. We'll see. But overall, to kind of give you my quick thoughts on this, I know I'm a bit rambling here. It's kind of just an inconsistent volume. I like the first volume the most in this series so far. Volume 2 was okay. Volume 3, I would say, is slightly better because there are more interesting storylines happening here, like the big hell event. But once again, it's kind of a thing where it doesn't really happen in this specific volume. You have to go to another series, which is a big no-no. And the Power Girl stuff is interesting, but, like I said, it's kind of the beginning of that storyline. Overall, it's kind of a meh volume. Slightly better than Volume 2, but not as good as Volume 1, in my opinion. So yeah, that's my review of Supergirl, the New 52, Volume 3. All right, peace out, y'all.